In this episode, we turn to a stage of incident management that often receives less attention than detection, containment, or recovery, even though it is one of the most important places where an organization either becomes stronger or stays vulnerable to the same kinds of problems. Once the immediate pressure of a security incident begins to fade, there is a natural temptation to move on, catch up on delayed work, and avoid revisiting a stressful event that everyone would rather forget. That instinct is understandable, but it is also dangerous, because the period after an incident is when the organization has its clearest chance to learn what really happened, what actually worked, and what needs to change before the next disruption arrives. For someone studying the Certified Information Security Manager, CISM, this topic matters because security leadership is not only about managing the crisis itself. It is also about making sure the organization learns from the crisis in a disciplined way so that one painful event becomes a source of practical improvement rather than just another unpleasant story people remembered differently a few months later. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A meaningful post-incident review is a structured effort to look back at an incident after the immediate response has stabilized and ask clear, honest questions about facts, decisions, outcomes, and lessons. The goal is not merely to produce a report or satisfy a management requirement. The real goal is to understand the incident well enough to improve future prevention, detection, response, recovery, communication, governance, and business resilience. That is why a meaningful review is very different from a rushed meeting where a few tired people say everything went mostly fine and then return to their normal work. It should create a reliable picture of what happened, why it happened, how the organization responded, where confusion appeared, and what changes would reduce future risk. Beginners sometimes imagine that post-incident work is mostly administrative, but from a CISM viewpoint, it is part of risk management itself. If an organization does not turn incidents into lessons, it will often keep paying the cost of the same weaknesses again and again, even if the details of each event look slightly different on the surface. One reason post-incident reviews are so valuable is that incidents expose reality in a way normal planning rarely can. Policies, playbooks, and training materials may look reasonable during quiet periods, but a real event shows how people behave under time pressure, how quickly teams communicate, whether decision authority is clear, and whether technical controls and business processes work the way leaders assumed they would. In that sense, an incident is not only a problem to solve. It is also a revealing test of the organization's actual operating condition. If teams struggled to escalate quickly, if business leaders did not understand the seriousness of the event, or if recovery depended on guesses rather than trusted information, the incident has revealed weaknesses that deserve attention. A meaningful review captures those truths before the memory fades or the organization starts protecting itself with simplified stories. For new learners, this is a major insight because post-incident reviews are not about assigning drama to the past. They are about capturing useful reality while it is still visible enough to strengthen the future. Timing matters a great deal when conducting a review, because there is a point where the organization knows enough to learn productively, but not so late that key details have already been lost or distorted. If the review happens too soon, teams may still be in the middle of active recovery, evidence may still be incomplete, and participants may be too focused on immediate tasks to reflect carefully. If it happens too late, memories begin to fade, people return to their routines, and the urgency to learn disappears beneath everyday operational pressure. A meaningful review usually takes place after the incident is sufficiently contained and stable, but while the people involved still remember what they saw, what they believed at the time, and where confusion or delay occurred. This balance is important because a review is not simply an emotional debrief. It is a management activity that depends on both reflection and evidence. Strong security leaders understand that good timing helps the organization move from reactive survival mode into a more thoughtful mode of learning without waiting so long that useful insights become vague, incomplete, or politically filtered. Another important part of a meaningful review is having the right people involved, because incidents almost never belong to only one team. Security staff may understand alerts, investigation details, and containment actions, but system administrators, business owners, communication staff, legal advisors, help desk personnel, privacy leaders, vendor managers, and executive sponsors may all hold parts of the larger story. One group may know why a decision was delayed, another may know why a system dependency complicated recovery, and another may understand how customer communication landed in the real world. If the review includes only the security team, it may produce a technically accurate account that still misses crucial business lessons. If it includes only executives, it may stay too general to reveal what actually broke down. For beginners, this shows that post-incident reviews work best when they bring together the people who experienced the incident from different vantage points. The purpose is not to crowd the room with everyone available, but to make sure the organization can reconstruct the event as a connected business incident rather than a collection of isolated technical memories. The environment of the review matters just as much as the attendee list, because people will not share useful lessons honestly if they believe the meeting is mainly a search for blame. A meaningful post-incident review should encourage candor, responsibility, and disciplined self-examination without turning into a personal attack. That balance can be hard to achieve, especially after a disruptive event that created stress, public scrutiny, financial pressure, or executive frustration. Leaders sometimes swing too far in one direction, either making the review harsh and defensive or making it so gentle that nobody is willing to name clear failures. Both extremes weaken learning. A useful review treats mistakes as valuable data while still recognizing that accountability matters and that repeated negligence or ignored warnings cannot simply be excused. For a CISM learner, this is a crucial leadership principle. People are more likely to report honestly, admit uncertainty, and describe where the response struggled when they believe the purpose is improvement grounded in facts, not humiliation dressed up as process. At the same time, meaningful learning requires enough seriousness that avoidable failures are examined rather than politely ignored. A strong post-incident review usually begins by reconstructing the incident timeline as accurately as possible, because shared memory is often less reliable than people expect. Different teams may remember the starting point differently, confuse detection time with compromise time, or overlook important events that seemed minor until later evidence gave them new meaning. Building a timeline helps the organization answer basic but critical questions such as when the first signs appeared, when the incident was recognized as serious, what actions were taken at each stage, and when leadership, legal, vendors, or customers became involved. This timeline should be grounded in evidence as much as possible, including logs, alerts, tickets, emails, meeting records, and documented decisions, rather than relying only on recollection. The point is not to create a perfect historical narrative with absolute certainty at every minute. The point is to establish a trustworthy sequence of events that can support analysis. For new learners, this step matters because many later conclusions depend on it. If the organization gets the sequence wrong, it may misjudge what caused the most delay, what controls failed first, or which decisions actually made the situation better or worse. Once the timeline is clear enough to support discussion, the review can examine the response itself in a more thoughtful way. This means asking how well detection worked, how triage was handled, whether escalation happened at the right time, whether containment choices were appropriate, whether communication was clear, and whether recovery decisions were based on real confidence or simply urgency. A meaningful review does not judge the response only by the final outcome, because sometimes teams reach an acceptable ending through a path that was far more fragile, costly, or confusing than it should have been. It is important to look at decision quality in context by asking what people knew at the time, what assumptions they were making, and what pressures shaped their choices. That helps the organization avoid unfair hindsight while still learning honestly. From a CISM perspective, this is where the review becomes especially valuable, because security leadership depends on improving decision processes, not just noticing technical details. If the response succeeded only because a few experienced people improvised around broken processes, that is not a reason for comfort. It is a warning that the organization may not be as ready as it hoped. A meaningful review also has to examine causes, and that means going beyond the visible trigger of the incident to understand the deeper conditions that allowed it to happen or worsen. A phishing message may have started the incident, but the larger causes could include weak identity controls, poor user reporting habits, limited monitoring, unclear escalation, or excessive privileges that turned a single compromise into a broader problem. A server misconfiguration may have exposed data, but the underlying causes might involve weak change management, inadequate review, unclear ownership, or pressure to move quickly without proper validation. Strong reviews look at technical causes, process causes, human causes, and governance causes together, because incidents usually emerge from a combination of factors rather than one simple failure. For beginners, this is one of the most important lessons in the whole topic. If the organization only fixes the most visible symptom, it may feel productive for a while, but it will miss the systemic conditions that made the incident possible. Meaningful reviews ask not only what happened, but also why the environment was prepared to let it happen in the first place. The business impact of the incident also deserves careful review, because security incidents are not important only for what they do to systems. They matter because they affect operations, customers, employees, regulatory obligations, executive confidence, vendor relationships, and sometimes the public reputation of the organization. A meaningful review should therefore examine how the incident affected real business activity, whether service disruption was understood clearly enough, how financial and operational consequences were assessed, and whether leaders had the information they needed to make timely decisions. It should also look at communication quality across the event, including internal coordination, executive updates, employee guidance, customer messaging, and any external notification obligations. Sometimes an organization handles the technical side reasonably well, but stumbles badly in the human side of the response, creating confusion, inconsistent statements, or delayed outreach that amplifies the damage. For a CISM learner, this reinforces the fact that incident management is business management under pressure. The review becomes meaningful when it captures how the event touched the organization as a whole rather than limiting its analysis to technical containment or cleanup alone. Another valuable part of the review is evaluating capability, which means asking what the incident revealed about the organization's actual readiness before the event occurred. This includes reviewing whether staff had the right training, whether tools provided useful visibility, whether documentation was current, whether backup and restoration confidence was justified, whether third-party relationships helped or hindered the response, and whether governance structures supported fast decisions or slowed them down. The goal is not to treat the incident as a pass or fail exam. The goal is to identify where real capability existed and where the organization was relying more on hope, habit, or a few experienced individuals than on repeatable strength. An incident often exposes weak seams between teams, such as when security and operations do not share the same picture, or when business leaders are unclear on escalation thresholds, or when vendor responsibilities are assumed rather than confirmed. For beginners, this matters because meaningful reviews are one of the best ways to convert a stressful event into a capability assessment grounded in real evidence rather than theoretical maturity claims. The organization gets to see how it truly performs, not how it imagines it performs. None of this learning matters very much unless it is turned into action, which is why a meaningful post-incident review must produce more than observations. The organization needs to identify what changes should happen, who owns those changes, how urgent they are, and how they connect to reducing real risk rather than simply creating activity. Some actions may be technical, such as tightening access, improving monitoring, or redesigning system dependencies. Others may be procedural, such as clarifying escalation paths, updating communications templates, refining vendor responsibilities, or improving decision authority during fast-moving events. Still others may be strategic, involving budget priorities, staffing, architecture, or governance changes that take longer to address. What matters most is that the lessons are translated into concrete improvements with visible ownership and follow-through. For new learners, this is a crucial takeaway because the difference between a meaningful review and a performative one often comes down to whether anyone can later point to specific changes that happened because of what was learned. If the review ends as a document nobody uses, then the organization has preserved memory without producing improvement. It is equally important to track whether those action items actually happen and whether they make a difference, because many organizations are good at writing lessons learned and much weaker at closing the loop. Over time, the same issues may appear in repeated incidents or exercises because recommendations were never funded, never assigned, or never treated as urgent once the immediate pressure faded. A strong security manager recognizes that post-incident learning requires governance, follow-up, and visibility. Improvements may need to be reported upward, connected to risk registers, added to project plans, or reflected in future exercises so the organization can confirm that the lesson became a real capability change. This tracking matters because unresolved lessons are not neutral. They are known weaknesses that the organization has chosen, intentionally or unintentionally, to carry forward. From a CISM standpoint, that is a governance issue, not just an operational oversight. Meaningful reviews become far more valuable when they are tied to accountability for improvement, because that is what turns reflection into measurable strengthening of the security program. Over time, the best organizations use post-incident reviews to build an institutional memory that extends beyond one event and one group of participants. Lessons from one incident should influence training, playbooks, architecture, vendor expectations, business continuity planning, tabletop exercises, leadership briefings, and future investment decisions. When this happens consistently, the organization begins to mature because each incident contributes to a broader pattern of learning rather than remaining isolated in the minds of the people who happen to be there. This is especially important in environments where staff change roles, new leaders arrive, or teams grow quickly. Without institutional memory, the same hard lessons must be relearned by new people at full cost. For a beginner, this is one of the strongest reasons meaningful post-incident reviews matter so much. They are not only about honoring the past with accurate notes. They are about carrying experience forward in a usable way so that the organization becomes wiser, more disciplined, and more resilient even as people, technology, and threats continue to change. By the time you step back from the whole topic, the central lesson becomes very clear. Conducting a meaningful post-incident review is how an organization converts disruption into improvement. It creates a disciplined space to reconstruct what happened, examine decisions honestly, understand causes deeply, assess business impact, test assumptions about readiness, and commit to changes that reduce future risk. For someone new to CISM, the most important takeaway is that the review is not the quiet administrative ending of an incident. It is one of the most strategic moments in the entire life cycle because it determines whether the organization simply survives the event or actually learns from it in a way that strengthens the next response. Done well, the post-incident review improves not only tools and processes, but also judgment, coordination, governance, and organizational trust. Done poorly, it becomes a missed opportunity wrapped in a meeting. That is why strong security leaders treat this phase seriously, because the organizations that learn well after incidents are usually the ones that handle future incidents with more clarity, less confusion, and far greater resilience.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.